Hello, hello. Welcome to Courage Becomes Her, where we connect and share real life stories. I'll talk with women whom I love and I'm inspired by, women who are experiencing life just like you and me. I'm excited for us to gather together and cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in life and work. Hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me today for this bonus episode of Courage Becomes Her. So we're continuing our summer reads series, and I'm so grateful for all of the tremendous feedback about these conversations that we have had and these books that we're learning about. And thank you to all of you who have entered the giveaways to win a copy of the books, as well as I've gotten many comments and text messages and DMs of those of you going out and actually purchasing the books. So thank you for supporting these women who are so courageous in publishing their books and publishing their stories. So today's conversation is with Brandi Wilson. So Brandi is an author, a coach, a speaker, and she has been in leadership for more than a decade at Leading and Loving It, which is a nonprofit that it was created to empower women to love life and ministry. Brandi has helped to plant 2 churches, including a mega church in the Nashville area, and she is passionate about walking alongside single moms and divorced women as they navigate parenting and life. Brandi lives with her 3 sons in the greater Nashville area, which you'll hear her talk a little bit about home life in our conversation today. So Brandi's new book is Better Than Okay: Finding Hope and Healing After Your Marriage Ends. So you'll hear me say it as I open up the conversation with Brandi, but I am blown away by her courage to write this book. I know many of you do not know Brandi and her story, but her divorce was a very public thing that was actually in newspapers in the Nashville area, and kind of a tabloid type of thing. And we talk a little bit about that in the conversation. She talks a lot about that in the book, of just what that created for her from a sense of trauma and grief as she was attempting to not only process the end of her marriage, but have it be, out in the open and out in the public, which is just, I can't even imagine. So in this conversation today, Brandi talks about how she navigated things one day at a time, including the days where she could barely get herself out of bed. We have a great conversation about what self-care looked like for her and how she leaned on her support system, even though she was tempted to isolate and just hunker down and stay home. She talks a lot about just the process of healing, the pain of loneliness, and the importance of things like therapy and counseling that helped her to heal and to get to the place where she is today, where she would not change a thing and wouldn't do it all over again, she said, but she definitely is in a much better place than where she was even when she was married. So I'm so grateful again for you to join us today for this conversation with Brandi Wilson. Brandi, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about your new book. I'm really looking forward to diving into that in a moment with you.
Oh, me too. Thanks so much for having me, Laurel.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'd love for us to get to know you a little bit first. So tell us first, where is home, and a little bit about your home life.
Yes, I live in a sweet town. It's kind of a modern Mayberry called Franklin, Tennessee, just about 20 minutes south of Nashville. I've been in this area for 22 years, so it's definitely home. My roots are in a small town, tiny town in Kentucky, but Nashville. Franklin is now home. I'm a single mom to three boys, well, I say boys, but they are now 22, 19, and 17. So young adult sons,
Yes.
I don't know, but we're definitely making that transition to where I have one son in college, one son heading to college in August, and then a junior in high school. And then two very, very, very high maintenance dogs. The only other females in the family are the dogs, and they're incredibly high maintenance.
My goodness. So funny. And they definitely make some appearances in your book. We get to know them a little bit more. So good. All right. What is a current obsession of yours in any genre?
A current obsession. Okay. So this is really kind of ridiculous, but I actually have one sitting here. It's my diet Canada dry ginger ale, which sounds ridiculous, but I had a trainer friend tell me a couple of years ago when I was, every once in a while you relaunch super healthy. She was like, you can have one Canada dry diet a day. So I took her serious, and I didn't realize it was an obsession until I was out of the country for about 10 days. And all I thought about was coming back to my diet.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's hilarious.
And I kept buying ginger ale at all these little markets in Europe, and they were delicious, but they weren't quite my diet. So I've got to cut back down to one a day, I think. She told me one a day, and I've gone up to like two a day. So yeah, I'm like, if I'm stressed, I'm drinking extra diet ginger ale. And if that's how I cope, I feel like it's okay.
Yes, that definitely sounds like not a bad obsession. So I love ginger ale, and I've never tried the zero sugar. So I'll have to test that one out.
So good. Yeah, so good.
Good. What has filled your cup in the last day or so?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Filled my cup. I think a couple of things. I love to travel, but I'm also a homebody. And I think the reality that I actually have a home I love coming back to, and a life I love coming back to. When people say, do you travel a lot? I'm like, I really don't. I travel just enough to be able to recognize how much I enjoy traveling and how grateful I am to have a life and a home that I love coming back to. That has not always been the case. I can think of several different seasons in life where I'd be on a trip and coming back home would create anxiety. And I think it just, I'm so grateful that I'm in a season where I've created this life that I love to live and enjoy coming back to.
I love that for you. That's so beautiful. Thank you. And we can all learn from that for sure. So I love books, and we talk a lot on the Courage Becomes Her podcast about books. And I know in your book, you actually put a list of books that help to guide your healing process that we're going to talk about here in a moment. But I'd love to hear if there's, one book for you that has transformed your life. What would that be?
Yeah, I actually pulled it because I always get the title wrong. It's transformed my life, and I always get the title wrong. But it's by Henry Nouwen, The Inner Voice of Love, A Journey Through Anguish to Freedom. And it's a book about grief. It's short. It's not super long. It's actually his journal entries and letters when he was walking through a situation and it was encountering grief. And someone gave it to me during my separation like 7 years ago. And it just became a lifeline because it was such a beautiful learning process in grief of staying anchored to God in the midst of it, and how as long as I was trying to find healing in anything besides God, that I wasn't going to heal to the depth that I needed to. So I actually just opened it back up in March of this year, and I'm going through it a second time. Now, I want you to know I've picked it up many times because it's so marked in, but I'm going through it from beginning to end 7 years later. And the first time I went through it, I underlined in black. And this time going through it, I've highlighted in green. And it's just even been so transformative to see how far I've come in the last 7 years since I read the book the first time. So I recommend this to anyone who's going through any kind of grieving process. I think when someone said Henry Nouwen, I was like, oh, it's probably going to be too heady for me, but it's not at all. It's really, really beautifully written book.
So good. I read it last fall as well for the first time. Yeah. And it is so beautiful. Such a lovely, he's just so open about his journey. It's just beautiful.
he's so open about his journey. And I love that it's not super wordy, because when you're walking through something really hard, focus and just being like centered on something really can take a lot out of you. So it is written in this letter format where it's, 2 or 3 pages at a time, which I feel like is super helpful.
I love it. It was so good. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. It is a really good one. So today we're talking about your book, your new book that has just come out, Better Than Okay, Finding Hope and Healing After Your Marriage Ends. So I knew a little bit about your story before reading your book. But I think a lot, and probably most of the Courage Becomes Her listeners are not familiar with your story. So first and foremost, before we launch into the conversation about your book and your journey, I want to say, I think it is so incredibly courageous of you to write this book and to share about a very public divorce and situation that was in newspapers and news headlines. And I think you say at one point in the book, like, obviously a very embarrassing and humiliating circumstance and experience and situation. So thank you, first off, for just being courageous enough to share, because I know your heart is to help others who are going through it and to be able to see that there is healing and hope that can come after this. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yes, it feels like such an honor to be able to share my story and the story of our family and how we started again when life fell apart. So thank you so much, Laurel.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. So I think I want to kind of start where we are now and then maybe work our way backwards a little bit. But one of the things that I think was so profound that you say toward the end is that you obviously never wanted to be a divorced woman. You never wanted to go through that experience. You never wanted your kids to, but you say very profoundly and very encouragingly and emphatically that you wouldn't change where you are today. And so I would love for us to start with just, how in the world did you get to that place where you can just have such peace, such confidence in being able to say, that experience was horrible, but I wouldn't change it.
Yes. Yeah. And, I don't want to go back and revisit it, but, the part of the book you're referencing is also a text message conversation with my son, my oldest son, who echoed that. I was sharing that at an event and he had tuned in to watch my message, and afterwards sent a text message saying, I agree, I wouldn't change our lives for anything. And even hearing that from my son was just healing for me, because it took a lot to get to where we are today. And I think to say, how did I get here? I got here one day at a time. And I know that sounds super simple and is very practical, but I think lots of times I realized for myself in the midst of my life falling apart, that the beautiful thing about when your life falls apart is you get to put the pieces of your life back together again, the way you choose. So I realized that pretty early on. But I could not think big picture. I could not dream 6 years out to where I am today. I couldn't think about what it would be like to be a single mom sending a kid to college. I couldn't think about how I was going to financially provide by myself for the 4 of us. So I just had to get super simple and take one day at a time, especially in those early days when getting out of bed was hard, where depression was taking over, anxiety was running rampant in my life. I really had to focus on, hey, what do I need to do today? What are the conversations I need to have? What are the meetings I need to go to? What are the, phone calls I need to make? What do I need to do for myself today? What do I need to do for my kids today? And break it up into just 24-hour periods. And at that time in my life, finishing a 24-hour period felt like a win, because life was so hard and it was just full of hurt and devastation and loss. And nothing around me felt good.
Yeah.
So I just had to really focus on making it through one day at a time.
Yeah, I love that. You have several things, and we won't get to all of them, that you talk about that, really sustained you through that. I think I'm a big proponent of community and support systems, and you talk a lot about that. But you also talk about like the challenge that you had of those moments of wanting to isolate versus reaching out to your community and your support system. So kind of talk a little bit about how you worked through that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think support system is so important just to walk through the good and the bad of life, the celebrations and the downfalls. In fact, it's probably the second question when I start working with clients and talking to women who could be in a similar situation. After I ask about if they're in therapy, I ask about their support system, because the support system is that key. And my best friend lives in Vegas. And during that time, she called me every single day. And part of that, she would just initially say, I just need to hear your voice today. And by hearing my voice, it would give her a pretty good indicator of how I was doing. So that was pulling me out. I think because you referenced earlier, the divorce was very public. My ex-husband and I had started a church in Nashville that had grown exponentially. It was the largest church in Middle Tennessee. It had several locations all across Middle Tennessee. He also had a career traveling and speaking and writing books. And so it did feel extremely public, which the way I'm wired caused me to want to isolate more. I am actually an introvert. That most people don't believe that, because I'm super relational. But there were definitely seasons and days and weeks where I would get up and take my kids to school in the morning, come home, pull into the garage, shut the door, go to the second floor of our house, so that if anybody popped by, they wouldn't think I was at home.
Yeah.
There's just, I think part of the frustration and the desire to want to isolate is there are so many questions in your life that you don't have answers to. Yeah. So people who are trying to love you well say, oh, can you tell me, what's going to happen? No.
Yeah.
Do you know where y'all are going to live? No.
Yeah.
What are you going to do for full-time work? I don't know. That there's something about asking questions, even though it's from a place of love and support, that can just start to shut you down because you don't have answers to those. It was so funny. One of my best friends is in Vegas. Her name's Lori. Another one is in Fort Lauderdale area. Her name's Lisa. Both of them are pastors' wives of very large churches. And at one point, I remember telling Lisa, like, hey, you and Lori have my permission to talk about me behind my back, so I don't have to repeat everything twice. And she said, oh, we already do. And, and that didn't bring me any anxiety or fear, because I knew they loved me enough. They were only saying the things that could help me and benefit me.
Yeah.
So that isolation is definitely tempting, but I just encourage whoever is feeling the tug to isolate to really reach out to community. It is scary. And I think you need to tell people what you need as best you can. One of the, I don't want to say mistakes, maybe one of the misunderstandings of people who are walking through severe grief and trauma is that we have a hard time knowing what we need.
Yeah.
So one of the things I learned, and I was taught this by a support system that actually blossomed during my divorce, a bunch of football moms that all had sons the same age as I did. But when you're the person who's in that grief and trauma, we don't know what we need. So when I have an open-ended question like, what do you need? I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. And honestly, if I do, you probably can't give it to me.
That's right.
So I realized that one of the things they did really well was they would give me options. Every Friday night, they would say, hey, tonight's a home game. Do you guys want to meet for Mexican before? Do you want to meet at the tailgate? Do you want to meet once we get inside to our seats? And I, based on how I was feeling that day, could tell them what I would need. And that's what we did.
That's great.
And in the midst of it, I didn't even realize the gift they were giving me. But I think, when we have someone, if you have someone in your life who's walking through divorce, separation, death of a spouse, some major trauma like that, when you approach them and say, hey, what do you need? Give them specifics. Like, hey, I can bring you dinner and leave it on your porch. I can bring food to your house and cook dinner for you and sit with you, or you can come to my house and I'll cook dinner if you need to get out. And by giving them those options, it allows them to step into what feels like the best option for them in that moment.
So good. I love that. Makes so much sense. Another one of the things you talk about is self-care. And I really, really, really love how you expand on what we traditionally look at self-care of, massages and mani-pedis and all of that sort of thing. And there you have a great list of probably 10 or so. But 4 that really stood out to me that have been meaningful to me in my own life, but also in my work with clients that we've talked about, of setting boundaries, eating a healthy meal, shutting down the negative self-talk, and avoiding numbing. Like, I just love those. And I imagine that those were far more helpful than, although the massages were probably very helpful too, but that those were just such a big part for you of the one day at a time, elements of those. So talk just a little bit about those. Cause again, it's a list and a type of self-care that we often don't really think about.
Right. And like you said, traditionally, when we think about self-care, it's like getting our hair done or our nails done or getting a massage. And what I have learned is that is maintenance.
Yeah.
That is maintenance. Now, do I enjoy getting a massage? Yes. Is it great for my body? Yes. But for me, self-care is about my body and my mind. I think those are all things I learned in the process of taking care of myself.
Yes.
I am a 2 on the Enneagram. I don't know if y'all talk about the Enneagram. But I'm a 2 on the Enneagram, and I do one of my gifts is I take care of other people really well. I love people really well. I can usually figure out what they need sometimes before they do.
Yeah.
I often know what they're feeling before they do. However, because of my attention and my desire for connection with other people, I ignore that in myself. So it is very simple, but I had to start asking myself, what do I need and what do I want?
Yeah.
And I still do that practice today. It has become more of just what regular life looks like for me. But initially I would have to stop going into, let's say I'm going to go to the beach for 3 days with a girlfriend. I would say to myself, what do I need from this time away? And I would walk through it, because what I know I would typically do out of habit is I would be like, oh, we're going to the beach. I love her. Let's spend a lot of time together. I'll do whatever she wants to do, whatever restaurant she wants to eat at, whatever. But the reality is, lots of time for me when I'm getting away, I just need quiet and time alone. I need to sleep late. I need to take a nap if I want to. I, need to have my journal with me. So if I want to process and write a little bit, I can do that. So for me, figuring out self-care was asking myself on a regular basis, what do I want and what do I need? And then making sure I made those things happen, because I can ask them, but I also have to follow through.
Yeah.
Even as simple as writing an email. What do I want out of this response? And to be able to say, I want this idea to be very clear. Well, then that becomes the focus. Don't let it get, watered down by a bunch of words, or distracted by chasing squirrels, as we say in the South. I'm sure that's not a California phrase, but, don't get distracted by that, but just ask yourself, what do I want and what do I need? And keep that at the forefront when you're making decisions.
So good. So important. And I think there is that, we'll default to something if we're not purposeful and intentional, right? Yes. So that makes so much sense. So good. So I think one of the things you talk about that we're kind of alluding to that I want to call out is this is a process, and there's a lot of work in this. And I think you call that out several different ways of that, that healing takes work. Healing is a process. Healing's not a straight line. I think those are each kind of phrases that you use throughout the book. It's not something that you can speed up. But we hate that, right? We hate
Oh.
looking at that reality. So for you, what has helped you to be okay, if that is possible, with the process, with the work, with it not being a straight line?
Yeah. That is too kind of frustrating when you're in the middle of it, because as you said, we want everything to be quick and we don't like to sit in our pain.
Yeah.
In fact, we hate to sit in our pain. One of the areas that I felt took the longest for me to probably get comfortable with in the healing process is just loneliness of walking through a divorce and doing life, quote unquote, alone. But I think for me, I knew I had learned, I actually heard a therapist say, there's a facility outside of Nashville called On-Site Therapeutic Center. And I had done an intensive there. I did weekly therapy for about 5 years. I'm now a little bit more spread out to somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks, but regular time with a therapist. But one of the things that was said at On-Site is your child's resiliency is directly impacted by their parents' ability to own their story, understand their story, and communicate their story. And what I knew is that my kids have been greatly impacted by this divorce. It was, one of their therapists said to me, your kids have walked through 2 divorces, the divorce of their parents and the divorce from the only church they've ever known. And that was our community. So I realized pretty quickly that my healing would directly impact my children. And there were so many things I couldn't control about the way they have been impacted in the divorce. I could control my own healing journey. So that really gave me the desire to continue to keep going. And believe me, Laura, when I tell you there have been many times that I've thought life was so much easier before I became self-aware. Because doing that work opened your eyes to a lot of things that you did not realize or did not see before. So in saying that, it's not easy work. It still is not easy work. But knowing that the way my kids would live their lives in the future would be directly impacted by how I chose to walk through hard stuff and how I chose to handle my own healing really lit a fire underneath me to keep going, even when it got really hard.
Wow. I love that. That's just, so beautiful. Hi, friends. Just interrupting this conversation with Brandi to let you know that Bethany House and Baker Publishing Group has offered 2 copies of Brandi's new book to the Courage Becomes Her listeners. All that you have to do is go on over to my Instagram, Laurel Emery on Instagram, and the giveaway participation details are there on the July 14th post. Super easy and very straightforward to win a copy of Brandi's book. I'd also love to ask you to please share this conversation with the woman in your life who is either separated or is getting a divorce or is recently divorced. I know that this conversation with Brandi will bring some hope to that woman who is experiencing pain and trauma and disappointment and just really needs to hear from another woman who has been where she is. So thanks so much for sharing with a woman you know. One of the things that you talk about was that you actively worked on was replacing the voices of the insecurity, of the doubts, of the shame, of the slander that was spoken against you with what does God say about me? What is God's voice, saying to me as well as about me? So how did that journey come about for you? Like, how did that even click for you to think, okay, I'm going to actively, replace these lies, this toxicity, with those truths?
Yes. So a couple of years post-divorce, I was in a coaching session being coached and with this really great guy. And I was talking about what he was asking me, what was holding me back. And one of the things that has been super difficult because, this was a public situation is that wherever I went, interacting with people. I remember the first event I went to where someone did not come up to me and say, "Oh, you're so-and-so's ex-wife. You're Pastor so-and-so's ex-wife." I remember clearly the first time I went to a public event that didn't happen. So when he said, "What is holding you back?" I said, "I'm tired of being the divorced pastor's wife." And he then said, "Well, who says that to you?" And I had kind of gotten to the point, I was probably 3 years post-divorce at this point, 3.5 years. And I recognized at that point, oh, that's what I hear in my head. And that made me aware when negative things would start to pop up, like I'm not a good time manager, or I didn't handle that financial decision correctly, or why do I feel the way I feel? That's wrong. I started realizing that was not my own voice I was hearing in my head. That was the voice of my ex-husband. So I got super specific and started praying. Actually, another question I would ask myself when something like that popped up is, whose voice do I hear? Let it be God's. And I'm actually in my primary bedroom. My master bathroom is right beside me, and there's a Post-it note there still hanging on my mirror that says, whose voice do I hear in my head? Let it be God's. Because I think we all battle that. We have all had things spoken over us, whether it's from a teacher who told us we were stupid, or a coach who told us we were dumb, or maybe a boss we had early on who told us we would never amount to anything. Those often are the things that we replay in our mind. Right. Yeah. And we can break the pattern of that. Our brains are malleable. Yeah. We can make changes and choices in our life to break the negative voices that we hear refraining over and over again, and replace them with the positive. Now, the first thing you have to do is identify it. Yeah. So lots of times when I'm working with clients and they'll say, well, I just don't think I'm good enough to be able to start this business. So who said that to you? Who told you that? And they have to stop and recognize, this is not something I've been told by someone who loves me or has been good to me. This is a negative voice that I've allowed to impact my daily decision making.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you. It's such a good, beautiful habit and a place to get to, for sure.
It's been a game changer for me. And I will tell you that I don't hear that voice in my head anymore, or definitely not near as often. I might catch it occasionally. And man, when I catch it, I can identify it so quickly because I worked so hard to be aware of it. When he said that to me, whose voice is that? And I became aware. I was like, oh, no longer. I listened to that voice for a long time. That's not the life I live anymore.
That's so good. Kind of along those lines, you also talk about just how much gratitude played into that process for you, the healing process overall. So share just a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think early on in this interview, I used the phrase, nothing around me felt good.
Yeah.
And that's where I was. Nothing around me felt good. I didn't have any answers to all of the questions in my life. Not only am I trying to deal with the trauma and the grief, I'm trying to lead my 3 sons who were small at the time through that. They were like 3rd and 4th grade, 5th grade, 8th grade. So nothing around me felt good. But I stopped one day and I recognized, you know what? I believe God is still good. Nothing around me feels good, but I know God is still good. So how can I find that in my life? And I just pulled this really simple, thin journal that I think I'd received as like a freebie off of my shelf. And I took an orange Sharpie and I wrote, focus on the good. I didn't even realize it was gratitude at the time. And I started making myself write down, 5 to 6 things every day that was good. And it was not easy initially. I would have to search for those 5 or 6 things. And I remember writing down, ice cream on the porch with the kids. At one point I wrote new hair dryer, which I know feels like a stretch, but it also represented that there would be new things in my life to come. And I think so often when we're overwhelmed with not having answers to questions, not knowing what's next, not being in a situation or a scenario that we never thought we would experience, we're lost so much that we can't even see the little small pieces of goodness around us. So it just made me really aware and switched my perspective of, listen, the big things in my life, none of them feel good right now, but they're still good out there if I'm willing to look for it and see it.
So good. Thank you. I love that so much. So I know I said it in the beginning, but your courage, your bravery is just so inspiring to me. It just is absolutely incredible. So who or what is inspiring courage in you as you continue down this journey 6-7 years later?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I've actually that's what I spent the morning as I was getting ready thinking about who is inspiring courage in me. And honestly, I could give a lot of answers to that question. I was just, like I said, in Europe doing work with Ukrainian refugees, and I found so much courage in those moms who were they're now living in Poland as refugees with their kids, and they've been separated from their husbands for 16 months. And we had one mom who talked about just being in the Ukraine with her kids asleep in the hallway, and she could hear bombs, and she just prayed the Lord's Prayer over them and over them and over them. That really inspires me, that level of courage. I think too, when I look practically just around me, I find a lot of courage. My oldest son is 22. And he is heading into his senior year of college, and he is very just determined. He's always been very determined. My strong-willed blessing. My friend Julie taught me to call him not my strong-willed child, my strong-willed blessing.
That's good.
I find a lot of courage in the way he approaches life and looking at, when I graduate college, what do I want my life to look like? And there's a lot of unknown for him, yet he also knows who he is and what he wants out of life. So I think in being able to define that, that's super courageous. At that age, I was married and helping other people chase dreams. So I love that he is willing to make sacrifices in his life to have a life that he chooses to live. So I find that super courageous as well.
I love that. It's so good. Well, thank you very much. I am delighted that not only in your book did you sound like you truly are better than okay, but you truly are better than okay. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
I thought it's so interesting when I talk to women in my scenario. The question is, will I be okay? And I can honestly say, you're going to be better than okay. And that's true. It's going to take work to get there, but it is an option that is available to all of us if we're willing to step into it.
Yeah, so true. So true. Well, thank you for sharing some of your journey with us.
Thank you for having me, Laurel. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Thank you. Such helpful information and insights. I just appreciate Brandi's knowledge as well as her wisdom and sharing all of that with us today. There were several topics that Brandi covers in the book that she and I didn't have time to talk about, including what does it look like to date again after a divorce? What does it look like to dream again? She also talks about just the unexpected blessings that came her way as a result of and through the healing of the divorce. And those are just really fantastic parts of the book that are very much worth reading and learning from. I would love for you to take time to connect with Brandi. You can do so through her website, Love Brandi Wilson, Brandi with an I.com, lovebrandywilson.com. That also is her Instagram handle, Love Brandi Wilson. And Brandi's a coach. She's a coach specifically for women who are going through unexpected transitions like divorce. She is accustomed to working with single moms about parenting and life. So I know that she would welcome the opportunity to work with you and come alongside you. So thank you so much for listening to my conversation today with Brandi about her new book, Better Than Okay. What an honor to help you to cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in your life and work. Thank you so much for inviting me to journey with you. I look forward to being back with you next week, where we'll hear another story from a woman whom I love and am inspired by and look forward to learning from.